This is where the problems really start to come in. When you start to get to the level where you're comparing a Switch 2 to a PlayStation, you're talking about two different consoles just competing on IP alone.
The unstoppable Exodia. Impossible! I've assembled all 5 special cards. Obliterate!
Friends, nerds, countrymen, lend me your ear. I have an important question to ask you. How much are you willing to pay for the Switch 2? Now, this is a loaded question because when the Switch 2's price is announced, it may be higher than what we think it is. Let's talk about the Switch 2's price.
If you're not subscribed, if you wouldn't mind just hitting that subscribe button for me, we've got time.
We got our first look at the Switch 2 in February with another extended look in April. And it showed us a lot of new features, including a larger display, new Joy-Cons, redesigned kickstand, a little bit of a teaser for this Mario game. But one thing it didn't show us was the price tag. I did want to point out this tweet from Wario64. Analysts who regularly communicate with Nintendo and software-hardware partnerships anticipate the price of $400 or more. So we're talking about a $400 price point is kind of the best estimate. This would put it a whopping $150 from the original $250 price point of the Nintendo Switch, which seems like a lot given the fact that the Switch 2 doesn't seem like much of an upgrade from the original Switch. However, there are some notable differences. Obviously, we talked about the magnetic Joy-Cons earlier and the redesigned kickstand. I think one additional feature that I don't think many people are talking about, they talk about these Joy-Cons being able to be used similar to the way that a mouse is able to be used. So this could be a game changer for first-person shooter games on the Switch, if that works, on pretty much any flat surface and seems to be easy to use, and it's integrated into the games. But it's never been about the hardware with Nintendo, right? It's always about those first-person games. And as we see here, Mario Kart's only going to be available on the Switch 2. A good Zelda, a good Pokemon, a good Mario game, a good Smash Brothers game are enough to bring a lot of people to buy the console just for those first-party games alone. But is it really worth $150 more? That, I think, is kind of debatable. We're gonna need a really, really good IP to convince a lot of people to buy a Switch at $400. However, just because they tell us on April 2nd that the Switch is going to be $400, that still doesn't mean that's what US customers could be paying for it. See, 47's tariffs pose a major problem for the Switch successor. Most of the Nintendo Switches that were produced by Nintendo were made in China, despite Nintendo being a Japanese company. Currently, a 10% tariff on Chinese goods went into effect on the same day that President Trump decided to delay tariffs on Canada and Mexico, where he was proposing a 25% tariff. While we don't know exactly where the Switch 2 is being made, it's unlikely that Nintendo massively restructured its production just to account for President Trump's tariffs. As Screen Rant talks about right here, a more realistic situation would involve a larger portion of its production still coming from China because moving production costs so much. If we're talking about a 20% tariff on a $400 good, that's $480 right there. I'm by no means the only one concerned about this. The Nintendo podcast made a great point about this. Let's listen.
I'm not making this political. I'm legitimately talking about the eventual situation that we may be in with the Switch.
Yep.
If people are still buying and importing things at 25%, he's gonna go, all right, 50%. And he's going to keep working these tariffs up until it hits a wall where we can't afford it and it has to come out of America. And he's saying here 25, 50, even 100% tax. 100% tax on a Switch at $400 is $800. $800.
This is where the problems really start to come in. When you start to get to the level where you're comparing a Switch 2 to a PlayStation, you're talking about two different consoles just competing on IP alone. And you could look at Nintendo and see their history as being the absolute leaders in first-person, first-party IP, right? Mario, Pokemon, Legend of Zelda, as properties, those are exclusive to Nintendo and are some of the GOATs. They are some of the most highest profiting first-party games. PlayStation hasn't been able to compete with that. We saw that with Astrobot. Astrobot is essentially a graveyard for Sony's IP problem. So if you're competing solely on the idea of who has the stronger IP in games, it seems like Nintendo would win. But if you start to propose a $500, $600, $700, $800 Switch right next to the PS5 that you paid $600 for, that doesn't feel like a fair comparison. Sony has always marketed themselves as a higher quality game. The games with some of the best graphics and animation and a very high emphasis on narrative, immersive storytelling. Whereas Nintendo games have been focused on approachable storytelling and fun gimmicks and fun mechanics and fun ideas, but not necessarily the gritty, gory, kind of high quality 5K gaming experience that Sony and Microsoft have offered. Now, with that said, these tariffs are going to affect their prices as well. If the Switch is still the cheapest console of all of them, it's still going to occupy that same space, but that price point could be massively higher. And for people that have already bought a PS5, that's where the comparisons are going to come in. The goal of these tariffs is to move production to the US. And as long as they're producing out of China in any way, shape, or form, Trump wants to punish companies that are doing that, which could mean that the price point of the Switch is in the middle of those crosshairs. With that said, there is a small sliver of hope that the Switch 2 could come out to be under $400 if Nintendo makes this one move.
So you're telling me there's a chance?
So, with all the talk about the Switch 2's price, things do look very grim, and it looks like it could be very expensive due to these tariffs. But there is a way that Nintendo could get around them. See, the China tariffs on the Switch 2's impact launch in the US, 0. When Trump had his first term, Nintendo with Hoseiden, Nintendo with that guy, decided to try to get 50% of production from Vietnam. So Vietnam production will supply the US, etc., and will supply the rest of the world. So if Nintendo can move their production to Vietnam, or already has moved their production to Vietnam, that could drastically reduce the price of the Switch. And just for the record, as of December, Nintendo has sold an estimated of 150 million Switches worldwide. And as of late 2024, only about 50 million of those units were sold in the US. That means that the US only accounts for about a third of their market, at least when it comes to the selling of the Switch. And if they've already moved 50% of their production to Vietnam, that should be more than enough to cover for the US. Now, with that said, Trump's entire objective with this is to get people to move their production to the US, and moving production to Vietnam does not move it to the US. If Trump gets wind of companies doing stuff like this, especially a big company like Nintendo, it could not only ruin that strategy for Nintendo, but it could ruin it for other companies as well and try to force their hand. The US doesn't even have the kind of raw materials needed without making it exponentially more expensive. So even producing it in the US would be more expensive than producing it in countries like Vietnam. Hopefully we will find out more about the Switch 2's price point when we get more information on it on April 2nd. Even then, I hope gamers understand how much these tariffs could come into play. Hopefully Trump's just bluffing about all of this tariff nonsense and it doesn't end up making ungodly expensive and unaffordable for most. I guess we'll find out in due time, but let me know what you think in the comments below. Be sure to like and subscribe, follow, do all the things. I am still growing this channel. It is still very new. Thank you so much for watching, and stay tuned. There's more videos in the future. See you next time.